They found it from the air. A shape in the canopy that shouldn't have been there. Too straight, too long, too perfectly geometric for the jungle. At first, they thought it was a ridge of exposed rock. Then the drone dropped lower, and the shape resolved into something the human brain takes a moment to accept. A Boeing 747, 70 meters of aircraft, sitting in the middle of a tropical forest that had spent 30 years trying to erase it from the earth. The jungle had almost won. Thick vines wrapped the fuselage like the fingers of something trying to pull it underground. Dark green algae streaked every surface. Moss covered the roof in a carpet so thick that small trees were growing from it. The landing gear had collapsed on one side, sinking into the soft jungle floor, giving the entire aircraft a slight tilt, as if the earth itself was swallowing it by centimeters per year. The engines were consumed. 4 massive turbofan engines, each 3 meters in diameter, each once capable of producing 60,000 pounds of thrust. Now they were caves. Vines wrapping the nacelles like tentacles. A tree growing vertically from one intake opening. Birds nesting in another. A monitor lizard sunning on the flat tires of the main landing gear, which hadn't moved in 3 decades. Every passenger window was a dark hole. Some had ferns growing outward from inside, the green fronds reaching for sunlight like hands. The cockpit windshield, cracked but mostly intact, was covered in vine growth so thick that the glass behind was barely visible. The passenger doors were sealed shut by corrosion and decades of jungle humidity. But beneath all of it, beneath the vines and the moss and the algae and the rust, beneath 30 years of tropical weather and biological assault, the structure was intact. The aluminum ribs, the structural frames, the fuselage skin, riveted in precise lines that were still readable through the grime. The engineering that once carried 400 passengers across oceans at 600 miles per hour had not failed. The airplane was consumed on the surface, but its skeleton was as strong as the day it was built. And then there was the tree, at approximately the center of the fuselage, where rows 25 through 30 would have been. A tropical hardwood tree had grown through the airplane. Not beside it, not near it, through it. The trunk was 80 centimeters in diameter, dark brown bark, deeply textured with crevices that held small ferns and epiphytic orchids. The trunk entered through the belly of the aircraft, where it had pushed through the cargo hold floor with the slow, irresistible force of decades of growth. It rose through the main passenger deck, through a ragged hole in the floor it had made itself. It continued upward through the ceiling, through the upper deck, and out through a 4-meter hole in the top of the fuselage, where it had simply punched through the aluminum skin like paper. Above the aircraft, the tree's canopy spread wide and green, merging seamlessly with the surrounding jungle canopy. Below, in the dark cargo hold, its root system spread across the curved floor like a map of rivers, thick roots gripping the aircraft's structural ribs as if holding the airplane down. As if the tree had decided years ago that this aircraft was its foundation, its anchor, its home. The tree was not a problem. The tree was the reason. Think about that for a moment. 30 years of growing, 30 years of pushing through aluminum and steel and wiring and insulation. The tree didn't know it was inside an airplane. It didn't care. It found soil. It found light. It found water. And it grew, straight up, through everything in its way, with the kind of patience that only something with no concept of time can have. And now 2 men were standing inside the airplane that the tree had claimed, looking at blueprints that showed the tree at the center of every floor plan. Not removed, not worked around, centered, honored, made the reason for every room. They arrived on foot. 2 workers in bright orange jumpsuits cutting through the undergrowth with machetes. The 747 appeared through the vegetation like something from a fever dream. They stopped. They looked up. The nose of the aircraft towering 8 meters above their heads. The fuselage stretching 60 meters behind it into the green darkness. They touched the hull. knocked on the aluminum with bare knuckles. The metal rang. A deep, resonant, hollow sound that traveled the length of the fuselage and came back. The airplane answering. The hull was strong. Pressurized aircraft fuselages are built to withstand the difference between cabin altitude and 40,000 feet of thin atmosphere. They are among the strongest cylindrical structures ever mass-produced. This one had been sitting in a jungle for 3 decades, and it still rang like a bell when you knocked on it. Inside, they walked the main deck and headlamps, destroyed seats, collapsed ceiling panels, overhead bins hanging open, full of bird nests and dead leaves and the small forgotten objects of the last flight. A pair of vintage sunglasses, a faded paperback novel, a child's toy, the archaeology of a crash, and at the center of the cabin, the tree, rising through the floor, disappearing through the ceiling, alive, growing, indifferent to the airplane around it. Its bark dark brown and deeply fissured, small ferns growing from the crevices, a bright red bromeliad attached at shoulder height, aerial roots descending from somewhere above, the trunk warm to the touch, even in the cool, damp interior, living tissue generating heat through photosynthesis and respiration, a biological furnace standing in the aisle of a dead machine. The taller worker put his hand on the bark, then his hand on a nearby seat frame. The seat crumbled at his touch. The tree was as solid as stone. The blueprints came out on a cleared section of floor. The cross-section showed 3 levels: lower cargo hold, main deck, upper deck, and at the center of every level, drawn in green ink, the tree, staying, the centerpiece, the column around which everything would be built. Stripping the aircraft took weeks. Every seat unbolted and carried out through the passenger doors. Some were so waterlogged they fell apart when lifted, fabric disintegrating, foam crumbling, metal frames rusting in your hands. But the floor rails they were bolted to were solid. The structural frames above were solid. Everything cosmetic had failed. Everything structural had held. The ceiling panels came down in clouds of dust and dead leaves and bird nests and startled pigeons that flew out through the broken windows into the jungle light. Behind the panels, the aluminum ribs of the fuselage appeared. Curved, precise, beautiful. Circular cross-section of a 747 fuselage is one of the most elegant shapes in engineering, and for 30 years it had been hidden behind sagging plastic. The pressure washer stripped decades off the exterior in hours. High-pressure water blasting through algae and grime in a moving line of revelation. Dark green becoming bright silver. Rivets reappearing. Manufacturing marks becoming visible. The aircraft's original identity emerging from beneath the jungle's disguise. Inside the cargo hold, the tree roots were mapped and measured. Every root documented. Every point where root gripped rib recorded. The roots weren't damaging the aircraft. They were reinforcing it. The tree had turned the airplane into its anchor, and in doing so, it had prevented the fuselage from shifting or settling further into the jungle floor. The tree was holding the airplane up, and the airplane was holding the tree straight. They had become one structure, one system. Steel I-beams were welded to the existing aluminum ribs, creating a new internal framework. The welding arc flashed blue-white against the curved aluminum walls. Sparks cascaded through the enormous cylindrical space, falling 30 feet before hitting the floor. A sound echoed inside the fuselage like thunder in a cathedral. New floors were built at each level. Marine-grade plywood on steel beams. At every level, a circular opening was cut precisely around the tree trunk. Not ragged like the holes the tree had made. Clean, engineered, bordered with a polished copper ring that followed the trunk circumference exactly. The copper meeting the bark at a 2-centimeter gap. Manufactured precision touching organic growth. The same detail repeated at every floor. The tree passing through copper rings like a thread through beads. Douglas fir tongue and groove panels covered the curved walls. Warm, honey-toned wood, following the cylindrical shape of the fuselage in smooth arcs. Each plank pre-bent slightly to match the curve. Each groove sliding over the tongue of the plank below with a fit so precise you could barely see the joint. The nail gun snapping in the enormous space, each snap echoing off the opposite wall. The ceiling panels curved overhead, following the barrel vault arch of the fuselage. The effect was a warm wooden tunnel, 60 meters long and 6.5 meters wide. The largest and most beautiful curved interior space most people will never enter. Consider the geometry. A 747 fuselage is a cylinder. Every wall curves, every ceiling arcs. There are no flat surfaces, no right angles, no straight lines anywhere except the floor. The Douglas fir panels followed this curvature, each plank a slight arc. The collective effect is space that wraps around you, a space that hugs, architecture that is literally round. People build round rooms because they feel different. They feel protective. They feel ancient. The inside of a 747 fuselage gives you a round room 60 meters long. And it turns out that the engineering requirements for crossing an ocean at altitude produce a shape that is also perfect for living in. When the amber LED strips came on for the first time, running along every wall-ceiling junction in a continuous ring of warm light, the fuselage stopped being an aircraft interior and became something else. A room, a home, a warm wooden cylinder in the middle of a tropical jungle, with a living tree growing through its center. The kitchen was built at the rear of the main deck, a tropical hardwood island counter 3 meters long. The dark exotic grain dramatic under the amber LEDs, a farmhouse sink with a copper bridge faucet, a professional 6-burner gas range. When the 6 blue flames ignited for the first time, they were the most precise thing in the building. 6 perfect circles of blue fire inside a curve of warm wood, inside a cylinder of aluminum, inside a jungle. Slate backsplash tiles followed the concave curve of the fuselage wall behind the counter. A detail no normal kitchen will ever have. A curved backsplash made necessary by the fact that the kitchen wall is the inside of an airplane. Copper pots were hung from a forged iron rack between the ceiling beams. Each pot a sphere of hammered copper catching the amber light. A copper kettle, a copper saucepan, a copper ladle. The warm metal and the warm wood and the warm light creating a kitchen that felt ancient and modern simultaneously. Glass jars on the curved walnut shelves, coffee beans, dried herbs, rice, each jar catching light through the glass. Fresh tropical flowers in a ceramic vase on the reclaimed teak dining table, red heliconia, orange bird of paradise. The jungle invited to the dinner table. The living room was built around the tree. A circular walnut bench followed the trunk circumference, dark green linen cushions. The bench creating a ring of seating where the tree was the centerpiece, the focus, the reason for the room. You sat with your back to a wall of curved bookshelves and looked at a living tree trunk in firelight. The cast iron stove was positioned near the wall, small enough for the space, powerful enough for the task. When the fire was lit for the first time, the warm orange light spilled through the glass door and hit the tree bark. Every crevice became sculptural. Every fern in the bark caught a shadow. The small white orchid blooming at eye level on the trunk became translucent in the firelight, its petals glowing like paper lanterns. Curved bookshelves followed the fuselage wall. 5 levels of shelves that arced around the room, filled with leather-bound books in browns and burgundies and dark greens. A brass compass on one shelf. A small potted tropical plant between 2 book groups. The curved shelves unlike any bookshelf in any house. They followed the inside of a cylinder, wrapping the reader in knowledge that curved around them. 6 oil lamp sconces were mounted at intervals around the room. Wrought iron brackets, glass hurricane shades. When they were lit, one by one, with a long match, each flame added a new pool of warm, dancing light. The tree trunk, illuminated from 6 directions simultaneously, became the most dramatically lit column in architecture, not by design, by the natural consequence of placing fire around a tree inside a cylinder. Hanging plants descended from the curved ceiling in macrame hangers. Trailing pothos, philodendron, string of pearls. The green vines hanging from the curved ceiling inside the aircraft, echoing the vines that once consumed the aircraft from outside. The jungle, invited in on the aircraft's own terms. A sheepskin rug on the polished concrete floor. A walnut coffee table with a steaming ceramic mug and a leather journal open beside it. A brass mechanical clock on the curved wall, its pendulum swinging. The room complete. The most extraordinary living room on Earth. Circular, warm, alive, inside a 747, built around a tree that refused to stop growing. Upstairs, the upper deck, lower ceilings, narrower space, more intimate than the grand main deck below. The tree trunk passing through this level too, entering through the floor and exiting through the ceiling. Its copper rings identical to the ones below. The architectural consistency reassuring. Every level acknowledging the tree in the same way. The bedroom at the rear. A teak platform bed beneath two curved glass windows. At this height, the windows showed not jungle floor, but jungle canopy. Treetops, sky, macaws flying past at eye level. You woke up in a 747 bedroom, looking into the upper canopy of a tropical forest. Brass reading lights, cream linen pillows, a gray wool blanket, an indigo woven textile at the foot, an oil lamp on a walnut bedside shelf, a leather journal, a brass pen, the personal details of a life lived in the most impersonal of structures. A mass transit aircraft made personal by craft and care. The cockpit was reached through the upper deck corridor. The massive door opened into the most spectacular room in the building. The original instrument panel was preserved. Dozens of analog gauges and switches and dials, cleaned and left in their aged patina. The yoke columns removed. In their place, two deep leather armchairs. A small walnut table between them. A whiskey decanter and two crystal glasses. And on the original center console, where the throttle quadrant once controlled 4 engines and the fate of 400 passengers, a brass telescope now pointed at the stars. The windshield, the massive curved glass panels, clean to crystal clarity, showing an ocean of green canopy stretching to the horizon. The view that 747 cockpit crews once used to navigate at altitude, now used to watch toucans on sunset and the first stars of evening from the nose of a grounded aircraft in the jungle. There is something about sitting in a 747 cockpit that changes you. Even grounded, even converted. The windshield is enormous. It was designed to give pilots maximum visibility at altitude, which means it gives you maximum visibility of the jungle canopy. The curvature of the glass, the angle, the height, it places you above the canopy line. You see what the birds see. You see what the pilots saw, except instead of runway approach lights and distant city grids, you see the slow green undulation of a tropical forest that has no edge and no end. The horizon is green. The sky begins where the green stops. And between the two, birds move in patterns that have nothing to do with human schedules or human plans. Below everything, in the belly of the aircraft, the cargo hold, dark, low, the curved floor, and the roots. Thick, powerful roots spreading across the floor like the veins of the earth itself, gripping the structural ribs of the aircraft, holding the tree above and the airplane below in a mutual grip that neither could break. Between the roots, walnut wine racks. Dozens of bottles resting horizontally in the dark, cradled by the same roots that cradled the aircraft. Beeswax candles in iron holders placed on root surfaces, the flames dancing and casting shadows that moved like breathing. Polished dark slate on the floor between the root paths. And in an alcove framed entirely by roots, a hammered copper soaking tub. The copper surface catching candlelight in 100 dimpled golden reflections. steam rising from the hot water into the dark root ceiling above, a wooden bath tray across the tub, a wine glass, a candle, the sound of nothing but roots creaking gently and water lapping copper. A bath among roots in the belly of a 747, the deepest, darkest, most luxurious room in the building, the room closest to the earth, the room where the tree began. This is where the story starts. Not up in the living room, not in the kitchen or the bedroom. Here, in the dark, among the roots. This is where a seed landed 30 years ago on the curved aluminum floor of a cargo hold, where a crack in the fuselage skin let in enough soil and water for germination, where a small green shoot pushed upward through the darkness and found the main deck above, and kept going through the upper deck, through the roof, into the light. Everything above, the living room, the kitchen, the bookshelves,